In today's video, I want to discuss an issue that I haven't really seen brought up anywhere else. What happens to factions once they've run out of units? So get comfy with a glass of milk and let's get started.
Wow.
To clarify, what I mean is this. The standard Lord packs contain 2 Lords, a smattering of units for each of the 2 factions involved, a free LC Lord without any additional units, and usually a something else, be that a racial rework, a special hero, a special unit, or what have you. This has worked brilliantly up until this point, but we're now approaching the situation where certain Game 1 and Game 2 races have the entirety of their official unit roster, and in a few cases, almost the entirety of their units, period, lore-only ones included. So what happens then? I mean, heck, even for the races with more units left, we are definitely starting to dance with roster bloat, and as much as I personally love that, I'm not sure that the multiplayer community would agree with me on that. We'll go through each option, we'll take a deep dive into the pros and cons of each, and then we'll conclude with an extra special last option, alright? So let's start with our worst case scenario. Simply, CA chooses not to do any more Lord packs if they can't find any additional units, or if that roster is simply too full already. While I don't think this option is particularly probable, there is some justification for it. By Game 3, we'll be sitting at 19 factions, and that's if they don't even do a single faction pack DLC. So there is a ton of other factions to pick from that'll all be vying for attention. So it logically stands to reason that CA could just straight up skip the factions that are already full for units. Historically as well, we have always had extra units with the Lord packs, and for some player, they're the actual focus of those packs, more so than the Lords themselves. If CA can't offer the whole meal deal, then perhaps skipping them altogether is a better option in people's eyes. On the other hand, there's a ton of reasons why this is also unlikely. For one thing, many of the main factions are almost out of units, while several are missing massive characters. The Lizardmen are a perfect example of this. A second blatantly obvious reason is money. Lord packs keep the lights on in between large content releases, so to walk away from that potential revenue stream seems extremely improbable. Lastly, there's a ton of ways around the issues of a lack of units that we'll cover later into this video. So the conclusion for option 1 is extremely improbable in my eyes. I looked at the simplest option first, now let's look at the second simplest, simply removing units from the legendary Lord packs. The basis for this would be incredibly simple. There is a metric ton of characters left, not so many on the unit front though in most cases. So divorcing the two would allow for many more Lord packs than we would otherwise be able to pull off. Now there would need to be a discount here. Charging full price for only a fraction of the content would be incredibly inappropriate. But in spite of the lack of units, these would still probably add considerably to the game, thanks to the new objectives, the new playstyles, and of course the legendary Lords themselves. CA could be pretty on board with these, as they'd likely still make decent money on them, and the reduced development load could probably result in more frequent releases. Additionally, these releases would give modders more tools to play with, which is something that's not only awesome from a player-based perspective, but also tends to promote more DLCs further. I myself bought my first Total Warhammer DLC just to access specific mods. The marks against this one though are pretty obvious. They'd have to generate less revenue per release, and there would likely still be less peak sales overall as well for each release. From the community's perspective, this would also be a bitter pill to swallow, as the multiplayer crowd gets next to nothing from each release. Only the modders and single player communities stand to benefit from it. Lastly, development time is not infinite. Time spent on these half releases would conceivably mean plucking that development time from things like full racial ones with all their missing units. In conclusion then, how option is likely to? I would say this is just as likely as the first one. Incredibly unlikely. But we got some ones with some more probable odds coming up next. What if instead of discounting the pack, CA instead focuses even more efforts onto the Lords themselves to make truly unique experiences? Imagine completely new campaigns and stories along with new mechanics to make for a playthrough that was absolutely nothing like you've played before. Instead of tweaking the core race's gameplay experience, you'd end up with a completely brand new experience. This could be particularly great for factions like the Bretonians, who don't have many proper units left but who have a ton of named characters with potentially very interesting gameplay methods left. Additionally, because there's enough meat on the bones, I should say, CA could keep the price exactly where it is, even without the additional assets being created or several voice actors being hired, which would give them even better revenue streams. But that last point is also our biggest strike against as well. Not every worker can simply be moved on to different tasks. A modeler or an animator can't simply be told, okay, now come up with new unique mechanics and code them in. So this would kind of leave CA in an awkward position where some of their staff would effectively be twiddling their thumbs while other parts of their staff would be drowning in work to do. There's also a heightened risk here. Budget would understandably still be fairly high, but you're now selling a premium product that means next to nothing for multiplayer players or very little for modders. So the probability of this option, sadly, I don't think it's particularly likely, even though as a single player this would be amazing in my eyes. Okay, so if more complicated doesn't work and cheaper potentially means less money, why not just do more stuff? Instead of a head-to-head, why not do a 3-way or a 4-way showdown? The justification here is plentiful. Your staff workload evens back out to right where it was, modelers and animators still have multiple things to handle at the same time as the developers and planners do. The DLC also has good value for every niche of the community, single player, multiplayer, and modder alike. Price point is incredibly easy to justify as well, because you're literally giving twice as many lords as usual, also which helps make it a fairly low risk endeavor from CA's perspective. And again, this could make quick work of races who are missing way too many characters while they have very few units left. A great example of this, for example, would be the vampire counts, who have very few units left, but are missing characters from every other bloodline beyond the Van Karsteins, while also missing Nagash himself. Doing up a 4-pack of vampire lords from the Blood Dragons, Necrarchs, Strigoi, and Lamians would make for an extremely easy theme to sell, just as it would for Chaos. You could do one for each god, or one of each god, for warriors, Norska, beastmen, and daemons. Now, the downsides of this are pretty few and far between. While there's still a small amount of risk, there is still risk, and in this instance, the risk actually becomes focused onto the theme itself. So, for example, doing up a Sinchian 4-pack might go great if everyone's champing at the bit for Sinch content, but if the community isn't interested in that particular theme, you don't even necessarily have the 50% justification you normally do from a standard lore pack, where at least one half might interest people. Additionally, while tying this into races that have multiple DLCs might be nice from those of us who own everything, for example, that Siege pack would rely on the Beastmen, the Warriors of Chaos, and Norska, 3 races that are themselves DLC races, which might leave a bitter taste in some people's mouth. The second issue is a smaller one, but it's a simple one. Doubling the amount of characters per pack halves the maximum amount of packs you could conceivably do at some point. What are the odds? Decent, I'd argue. Probably not as high as our next pick, but still decent odds. Alright, so perhaps there's no 8th edition units left for a race, and maybe even the lore only units are running pretty low, such as with the Tomb Kings. What's CA supposed to do in such an instance as that? Well, the same thing they did with Norska and the same thing they did with the Vampire Coast. Make it up or steal stuff from other lores. The Monstrous Arcanum still has oodles of stuff left in it, Storm of Chaos still has a ton of stuff left to steal, and then of course there is the litany of things remaining from 1st and 2nd edition Warhammer RPG. The reasoning to do this is twofold. Not only would this maintain the status quo where you still have your units and whatnot, but no doubt this would appeal really well to the hardcore lore fanatics who love the deep cuts. Not that I know anyone like that around here, if you know what I mean. Of course, there's a very large, very obvious problem with it, and it's something we brought up right at the beginning of this video. Roster bloat. Some of these factions still have over a dozen major named characters left, and if we go by the usual 5 units per pack, that means we are adding a ridiculous 60 units to already fairly full rosters. There's simply no getting around that level of bloat. It would be egregiously bad. There's also the problem of stretching the extra resources to account for that too. Finding even 20 units for some factions is going to be damn near impossible, let alone 50 or more. It simply won't be possible with in-lore units in some cases. CA would literally have to create stuff out of thin air to pull it off. Do I think this is likely? Yeah, to be blunt. As many issues as I actually think that this is probably the single most likely option on the list, as it's the least likely to rock the boat for most players. Alright, but what if we could add tons of new units without making things bloated all to hell and back? What if we could not only do even that, but add even more replayability than a standard lore pack could ever get us? Well, gosh, that sounds absolutely wonderful. How could we accomplish such a thing? By separating the rosters into specific sub-factions. This is something I've brought up many times in the past as a nice-to-have feature, but if CA keeps pumping out Lord packs, it's eventually going to shift from nice-to-have to need-to-have. The benefits from this are extremely obvious. CA can keep the status quo without blowing out the rosters, and it also provides even more definition for individual legendary lords, kind of like what we sort of see right now with Total War Troy. And touching on that last point, CA already has experience with this. Not only do they have the aforementioned Troy under their belt, but also some factions already have exclusive units, such as Silostra and her Damned Paladins, and modders have been doing this for ages without issue. So what are the downsides? Don't really have any ones for you on this one. This one kind of seems like a slam dunk for everyone involved. Everyone has more content, single players and multiplayers have more variety, CA gets to keep the price point at the same price without slowing down the amount of roster releases. So the probability for this one win? Well, this makes a little bit too much sense, so I really can't imagine that it goes this smoothly. I would still expect that CA just bloating the rosters all to hell and back takes precedence over this one. But if it's an extra special bonus entry, as much as we've gone over official CA solutions, you know what the best possible solution to this whole mess would be? Just give the modders the keys to the kingdom and let them sort it out. Now, this could be treated as a combination of this particular entry as well as entry 1, in the sense that CA could do as many Lord packs as was financially or practically viable before unlocking the modding tools on their last release to let the community go absolutely nuts and fill in every remaining gap themselves. The reasons to do this would be obvious. It takes literally all the pressure off of CA. They can make money for as long as possible, and when the Lord packs are no longer financially viable or are simply too difficult to get into the game practically, they just flip a switch for free and get the kind of goodwill that companies normally spend millions of dollars to earn. From the player base's perspective, the justification for this should be obvious. Replayability on heavily modded games is huge. People still play Morrowind and Fallout New Vegas, and those games are ancient in comparison. Morrowind's old enough to drink in most countries, and yet I myself still find myself popping it in and playing because the mod content means that there's constantly something new to do. Now imagine a 20-year tale on something like Total Warhammer. It would be glorious. As for the downsides, there is literally no downside for anyone involved, which is why the fact that this is horribly unlikely is beyond frustrating. CA has a reputation of being super stubborn with opening up the mod tools for Total Warhammer, even when they're already out of date. We've seen this already with the modeling, and we've seen this already with animations. I sincerely expect that nothing is going to change even after everything's all said and done by Game 3. Anyways, that's it for my list of possibilities. Did I miss anything obvious to you down below, though? Do you not even see this as being an issue? Do you expect that they'll do a different thing than what I suggested? Maybe you expect that they'll just walk away? Let me know down below. I always like chatting with y'all. Anyways, that's going to wrap it up for this particular video, but I hope to see you all next time.